I thought the strangest thing about that 2 a.m. gas station run was the man sitting motionless on the floor, staring at a refrigerator with dead eyes. But when he followed me home at 100 mph and rammed my car off the highway, I realized that was just the beginning of the nightmare. Story 1. Listen, there's this convenience store off the interstate, about 25 minutes from my place if I'm pushing the speed limit, which, let's be honest, I always am. In a town this isolated, that might as well be your neighbor's driveway. My sleep patterns are completely destroyed, so I've become a regular at this place during the witching hours. I like to think I'm forgettable enough that nobody really notices me. But after all these late-night visits, I wouldn't be shocked if the graveyard shift workers have started recognizing my face. What I'm about to tell you happened just 7 days ago. Every single detail is burned into my memory like a brand. It was well past midnight when I was deep into a coding session on my laptop. My brain doesn't really wake up until 9 p.m., and by 3 a.m. I'm operating at peak performance. I was locked into that zone where everything just clicks, where time disappears and the work flows. But here's the thing about grinding through the dead of night. Your body doesn't send you gentle reminders. 1 second you're fine, the next you're starving so badly your hands are shaking. That's what forced me to close my laptop around 2 a.m. and make the drive. The highway, if you can even call it that, is more like a forgotten back road that nobody uses after sunset. It's the kind of desolate that makes you question if other people actually exist. The drive started off normal enough. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. I pulled into the parking lot, walked inside, ordered a sandwich from the counter, and started wandering the aisles while they prepared it. The mixture of caffeine coursing through my system and the ADHD I've had since birth makes standing still physically impossible. I was just pacing near one of the corners, killing time, when something caught my eye that made my blood run cold. There was a person sitting cross-legged on the floor at the end of the aisle. Just sitting there, facing the refrigerator like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. The image was so bizarre, so out of place, that my brain initially rejected it. I looked away, then snapped my head back around, certain I'd imagined it. But no, he was real. This person, dressed in a brown jacket and worn jeans, was literally sitting on the filthy floor, staring into the refrigerator with an intensity that wasn't human. I couldn't make out his face from where I stood. Just the jacket, just the stillness. I needed to see more. I needed to understand what I was looking at. So I moved down a few aisles, planning to swing around the corner quickly, catch a glimpse of his face, then retreat before he noticed me watching. Because staring at strangers like that is rude, right? You're not supposed to do that. I tried to play it casual, pretending to browse the snacks on the shelves. But the second I turned that corner and my eyes found him, his head whipped around with such violent speed that I actually stumbled backward. The movement was wrong. Too fast, too mechanical, and his face. God, his face. This wasn't just someone having a bad night. This person was on something powerful. Something that had hollowed him out and filled the empty space with pure wrongness. His eyes were stretched open so wide I could see the whites all the way around his irises. His bottom lip was trembling, no, vibrating, like he was freezing to death. Except the store was actually warm, hot even. And he was wearing that thick jacket. His posture was twisted, contorted, like his body was fighting against itself. Like sitting was causing him physical pain, but he couldn't stop. But the absolute worst part was the way he looked at me. Not angry, not confused, just blank, empty. Like looking into the eyes of something that used to be human but wasn't anymore. Like staring into a corpse that somehow still moved. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Finally, I tore my gaze away and practically fled up one of the aisles, desperate to grab my food and get the hell out. But my sandwich wasn't ready yet. I had to stand there at the counter, waiting, feeling my anxiety crawl up my spine like spiders. I positioned myself so I could see the corner where that thing had been sitting, half expecting it to come crawling out from between the shelves. But it never appeared. Eventually my order was ready. I grabbed it and left without looking back, thinking that was the end of this nightmare. But as I turned onto the highway, something moved in my peripheral vision. I glanced back toward the store and saw a figure sprinting, from the entrance toward the far end of the parking lot. I was already halfway onto the road, but I caught a flash of that brown jacket and knew immediately it was him. As I passed the store, I looked over one final time and watched him throw himself into a pickup truck. I didn't want to know what someone like that was rushing to do at 2 in the morning. I was just grateful it had nothing to do with me. I hit the gas hard, wanting nothing more than to be home behind a locked door. After a few minutes, the fluorescent glow of the storefront faded into absolute darkness behind me, and I was alone again on that empty road. I'm used to being the only car out this late, which is exactly why the headlights that appeared in my rearview mirror made my stomach drop. But it got worse when I realized those headlights were getting closer. Faster than I was driving, and I wasn't exactly obeying the speed limit. My first thought was, cop. My foot instinctively eased off the gas, preparing for those blue and red lights to start flashing, preparing for my night to go from bad to worse. But when the vehicle finally got close enough for me to make it out, I realized with creeping horror that it wasn't a police cruiser. It was him, the guy from the store, the same truck from the parking lot. I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life. I slammed my foot back down on the accelerator, my heart hammering against my ribs. The driver behind me started flashing his high beams directly into my mirrors, blinding me and laying on his horn in long, aggressive blasts. I had two choices. Try to outrun him, or pull over and pray he'd just keep driving past me. I was in a sedan. He had a pickup truck. But sedans are faster, more maneuverable. I thought I could lose him, but the faster I drove, the more the terror consumed me. It was pure, primal fear, the kind that tells you death is approaching and there's nothing you can do to stop it. By the time I hit 100 mph, a voice in my head was screaming that I was going to die, that this speed would kill me even if he didn't. I swerved into the right lane, hoping he'd blow past me and disappear into the night. Instead, he swerved to stay directly behind me. I started slowing down, preparing to pull onto the shoulder, to end this insanity however it was going to end. The moment my foot left the gas pedal, his truck smashed into my rear bumper. The impact sent me lurching forward against my seatbelt. I grabbed the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles white, and realized with absolute certainty that I was in a life or death situation. This person was trying to kill me. This was real. Everything was happening too fast. My thoughts were fragmenting, scattering. I knew he was going to ram me again, and at this speed, I knew I'd probably spin out, probably die. I don't know if it was the terror sharpening my instincts or pure survival mode taking over. But the moment I saw him accelerating for another hit, I jerked the wheel hard to the left and slammed on the brakes with everything I had. His truck shot past me like a bullet. I watched, frozen, unable to breathe, as he swerved wildly back and forth, fighting for control before spinning out completely and shooting off the highway into the dark field beyond. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely keep them on the wheel, but I forced myself to start driving again. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I drove the entire way home at terrifying speeds, checking my mirrors every 3 seconds. The moment I got inside my house, I called the police and reported everything. Though honestly, I couldn't tell them exactly where the attack happened. Everything was just darkness and road. They took my statement anyway, and I was relieved to give it. I know that convenience store has security cameras in the parking lot. I'm counting on them catching this psycho before he does this to someone else. It's been a week now. I haven't heard anything from the police yet. My car has some damage to the rear bumper, but it could have been so much worse. As for why that man came after me, I have absolutely no idea. I just pray I never see him again. Story 2. This happened during the summer of 2022. I was 25, working one of those jobs that's hard to explain to people. I was hauling refurbished electronics and custom-built PC components for a last-mile delivery startup trying to compete with Amazon in places Amazon refused to go. Weird? Rural markets in the middle of nowhere. The routes were brutal. Completely unpredictable. Sometimes I'd drive for 12 hours straight, often through the night, hitting these isolated corners of the Southwest that most delivery services wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. The pay was good enough to make it worthwhile, and honestly, I didn't mind the long drives. I grew up in a family that lived for road trips, so solitude on the highway felt natural to me. This particular night, I was in the final stretch of a Phoenix to Lovington run. It was around 1 a.m., and I was winding through this desolate section of Route 82, just past the outskirts of Lincoln National Forest in southern New Mexico. If you've never driven through that area after dark, it's difficult to put into words how isolated it feels, how alone you are. The road is narrow, poorly maintained, barely lit. You might see another vehicle every 20 or 30 minutes if you're lucky. But here's the thing about that particular stretch of Route 82. It's also the only accessible route through that area for miles in any direction. The GPS alternatives would add at least 2 hours to the trip, forcing you way up north through Carrizozo and beyond. So if you needed to get from point A to point B in that part of New Mexico, you had no choice. You took Route 82. I was listening to a true crime podcast when I came around a bend and spotted a red hatchback awkwardly pulled onto the gravel shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. I slowed down instinctively as I got closer. My headlights illuminated a woman standing beside the car, holding her phone up in the air like she was desperately searching for a signal. My first instinct was to keep driving. I'm not heartless, but I'm also not naive about the kinds of situations you can stumble into in that part of the state at that hour. But then I started thinking about my girlfriend, about my sister, and how I'd want someone to stop if they were stranded in the middle of nowhere like this. Plus, I wasn't defenseless. I had a Glock 43 holstered just beneath my steering column. I never explicitly got permission from the company to carry, but given some of the areas we delivered to, it seemed like common sense. I slowed down and cracked my passenger window a few inches. The woman, who looked roughly my age, rushed over immediately and tried pulling my passenger door handle. It was locked. She said she needed a ride to the nearest gas station. She claimed her car had just died and she couldn't get anyone on the phone. Her voice had this jittery, unstable quality to it, like she was either severely stressed or high on something. I hesitated. The situation felt off somehow, wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. But knowing I had a firearm within reach tipped the scale. I figured if things got dangerous, I could handle myself. So I unlocked the door. She climbed in quickly and gave me a vague, slightly slurred, "Thank you so much," without making eye contact. The way she slurred her words made me think she was drunk, or at least tipsy, which immediately put me on guard. Before pulling away, I asked her the obvious questions. Had she hit something? Did the engine just cut out? That sort of thing. But she kept deflecting, kept interrupting me, repeatedly asking me to just drive. Just go. Nothing she said made any sense, and the more she talked, the more I considered kicking her out of my vehicle. I was about to make that decision when I glanced over at her car one more time. To my absolute horror, a man stepped out from behind it, like he'd been hiding there the entire time, crouched in the darkness, waiting. Adrenaline exploded through my system. I whipped my head forward and saw another figure standing directly in the road about 50 feet ahead of us. There was something long in his hands. Maybe a bat, maybe a pipe. I couldn't tell exactly. He started moving toward my truck. That's when my survival instinct kicked in. I floored it. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. The woman whipped around to look behind us and immediately started screaming. Then she reached down and started digging frantically through her purse, searching for something. I had a pretty good idea what she was reaching for. Before things could escalate further, I yelled at her to freeze and drew my gun. I didn't point it directly at her. I just rested it on the steering wheel where she could see it clearly. Whatever she'd been reaching for, she stopped immediately. I told her not to move and she obeyed. To my surprise, she stopped talking too. She just stared straight ahead with this expression I couldn't read. Blank. Empty. Luckily for her, we were less than 30 minutes from Artesia. After a tense, silent half hour, I pulled into a gas station. There were 2 other vehicles in the lot, both big rigs, and I could see a few drivers inside through the windows of the attached diner. I told her to get out. She refused at first, gave me some ridiculous excuse I can't even remember, but I leaned across her, yanked the passenger door open, and basically forced her out of the truck. She stumbled backward and fell hard onto the pavement, yelling something completely incomprehensible. Someone started jogging over, probably one of the truckers, and I could already imagine the accusations about to fly my way. From his perspective, he'd just witnessed me throwing a woman out of my vehicle. I didn't want to deal with it for even one more second. So I didn't. I shouted a warning to him about her, about what had just happened, but that was all I was willing to do. Then I peeled out of the lot before he could reach me. I drove to a different gas station and filled my tank. Then I walked over to the passenger side to inspect the seat. Buried between the cushions was a burner phone battery and a sealed package of zip ties. I didn't even want to think about it. I threw everything in the trash and got back on the road, desperate to finish this nightmare journey. I never reported any of it. Not to the police, and definitely not to my company. Not because I didn't think it was worth reporting, but because legally speaking, I didn't really want to explain to a bunch of cops why I was driving around armed, or why I'd physically removed someone from my vehicle. I'm not going to elaborate, but you can connect those dots yourself. One thing's certain, though, being armed that night may have very well saved my life. Story 3. This happened about 3 years ago, when my husband and I were driving cross-country from Utah to Georgia. The route we'd mapped out wasn't the most direct, but it passed through several places my husband really wanted to visit. The downside was that we'd be cutting through some seriously desolate stretches of highway. Worst section was through western Kansas along US Route 400, basically 100 miles of absolutely nothing but endless farmland stretching to the horizon. We'd been driving most of the day, and I'd fallen asleep in the passenger seat sometime around sunset. I'm one of those people who can sleep anywhere in a moving vehicle, so I was completely unconscious for several hours. Around 10 p.m., I woke up to the car slowing down and realized my husband had pulled into this tiny, isolated gas station off the side of the highway. He said he needed to grab some snacks and fill up the tank. I figured this might be my last opportunity for a while to use an actual bathroom, so I got out and headed inside. I didn't bother bringing my phone or purse. I was just going to be in and out, so I didn't see the point. The cashier was this older guy who didn't even glance up when I entered. The bathrooms were tucked down this narrow side hallway toward the back of the store. As I opened the women's restroom door, I nearly collided with a woman who was emerging from one of the stalls. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't have been particularly noteworthy, but nothing about this woman was normal. She had messy, unkempt gray hair that looked genuinely disgusting, oddly sticky, matted, like it hadn't been washed in weeks. She was wearing these foam flip-flops that made this soft, wet, slapping sound with every step she took. But what stood out most disturbingly was this thick purple and green coat she was wrapped in. Let me remind you, we were in Kansas in the middle of summer. It was probably 80 degrees outside. She was carrying this tied-up plastic grocery bag, and when she saw me, she just stared. Not a normal, "Oh, excuse me" kind of look, but this locked-on, penetrating stare that felt weirdly expectant, like she was waiting for me to say or do something very specific. I had no idea what she wanted, so I just gave her a polite nod and tried to step around her. But she didn't move to let me pass. She just stood there, blocking most of the narrow space. I assumed that would be the end of it, that she'd leave and I could use the bathroom in peace. But instead of leaving, the woman turned around and followed me toward the sink area. She didn't turn on the water. She didn't look in the mirror. She didn't do any of the normal things people do at a sink. She just stood there with her arms hanging at her sides like she was waiting for something. I was already feeling deeply uneasy, so I went into the nearest stall and locked it. The second I sat down, I immediately regretted not bringing my phone. I had no way to text my husband if something went wrong, and I was getting this overwhelming feeling that something was definitely wrong with this woman. I sat there for what felt like several minutes, just waiting for her to leave. Eventually, I heard the soft slap of her flip-flops moving toward the door, then the sound of the bathroom door opening and slamming shut. Waited a few extra moments to make absolutely sure she was gone, and then I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. I could still hear breathing. Not my own, someone else's, coming from somewhere else in the bathroom. It hit me all at once. She had faked leaving. She must have opened and slammed the door to make it sound like she'd left, but she was still in there with me, standing silently somewhere near the exit, probably in the corner by the door, just outside my line of sight. I didn't move. I sat in complete silence for an eternity, trying to quiet my own breathing because I was terrified she might hear me. The whole time I kept thinking about how stupid I'd been not to bring my phone. Eventually, the door opened and closed again. The breathing stopped, sending a wave of relief flooding through me. But I still wasn't convinced, so I waited another half-minute or so, straining to hear any sound. Just as I was about to unlock the stall door, I heard a huge, desperate gasp, like someone who'd been holding their breath for far too long, followed by the bathroom door opening and closing yet again. That's when I truly started panicking. This woman had pretended to leave twice. I had absolutely no idea what she wanted from me, but the fact that she was playing these psychological games made it clear that whatever her intentions were, they weren't good. I didn't know what to do. Part of me was convinced she was finally gone, but if she'd pretended to leave twice, what was stopping her from doing it a third time? Finally, the suspense became unbearable. I couldn't take it anymore. I unlocked the stall as quietly as possible and stepped out, fully expecting to see her standing there waiting for me. But the bathroom was empty. I washed my hands as quickly as humanly possible and stepped out into the hallway, having no idea where the woman had gone or if she was waiting for me somewhere else in the store. When I got back to the main area, there was this large man checking out at the counter. I lingered nervously by one of the racks near the entrance until he finished his transaction and walked outside. Then I used him as cover to exit the building, figuring that if the woman was waiting outside, at least there would be another person around. Part of me thought I was being paranoid, overreacting. That thought shattered the moment I stepped outside. As soon as I exited the store, I saw her again. She was lingering off to the side of the front entrance, and this time she was openly glaring at me with undisguised hostility. She was holding something in her hand that I couldn't quite identify in the darkness. It looked like it might be a knife, but I wasn't certain. The way she was holding it, though, and the way she was slightly crouched, like an animal preparing to spring, honestly made it seem like she was about to attack me. I prepared myself to scream, to run, to fight if necessary, but instead of moving toward me, the woman quickly turned and walked around the side of the building toward the back, disappearing into the shadows. I ran to our car and threw myself inside as fast as I could. My husband looked confused and asked what had taken me so long. I told him I'd explain everything once we were back on the road. He didn't question me, he just pulled away immediately. As we were leaving the parking lot, I looked back one final time and saw the woman standing at the edge of the building, watching our car disappear down the highway. I don't know why, but seeing her standing there made me feel more unsettled and uncomfortable than anything else that had happened. I told my husband everything, and he got understandably upset with me for not bringing my phone so I could call him for help, which was fair, but that was that, and we both agreed to try and forget about the whole disturbing incident and go back to enjoying our trip. I will say this though, I don't use roadside restrooms anymore, and I'm not even slightly upset about that decision. Story 4. This happened to me in 2020. I was 24 at the time, working for a small logistics company. My job involved delivering automotive parts between cities throughout the Midwest. Most of the time it was easy work, long drives, decent pay, and nobody micromanaging me. But that job is also the reason I will never, ever stop at a highway rest area after dark again. It was mid-January, bitterly cold, the kind of night where even the dashboard lights feel too harsh and bright. I was driving along I-80 heading east from Des Moines, on my way to deliver a package to Davenport. The drive was roughly 3.5 hours. I'd left around 8 p.m., and by 10:30, I was deep in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Just the monotonous sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional semi-truck blowing past in the opposite lane. Around that time, I started getting dangerously drowsy. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, and I could feel myself zoning out, my focus drifting. I spotted one of those blue rest area signs and decided to pull off for a few minutes to stretch my legs and grab something from the vending machine to wake myself up. The rest stop looked completely abandoned. A few dim streetlights, a small brick building housing restrooms, and about a dozen parking spaces. Only one other vehicle was there, an old white cargo van parked way off at the far end of the lot. Lights off, engine silent. I parked under one of the lights, locked my truck, and went inside. The men's room smelled faintly of industrial cleaning solution and mildew. The heater was making this weird, unsettling, rattling noise. I washed my face with cold water, trying to wake myself up. When I looked up into the mirror, I could have sworn I heard the door open behind me. I spun around quickly, but nobody was there. I stood completely still for several seconds, just listening, but heard nothing except the mechanical hum of the heater. I figured it was just the wind and finished up quickly. When I stepped back outside, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The white van's headlights were now on. The engine wasn't running, but the lights were definitely on. I didn't remember hearing it start. I hadn't heard anything. I got this immediate, overwhelming bad feeling. I unlocked my truck as fast as I could, climbed inside, and started the engine. I pulled out of the parking space and headed straight toward the exit. As I did, the van's lights suddenly shut off again, went completely dark. I remember thinking maybe someone was sleeping in there and had accidentally bumped the light switch. But as I merged back onto the highway, I kept obsessively checking my mirrors. For about 5 minutes, nothing happened. The road behind me stayed empty. Then in the distance I saw headlights, 2 small dots rapidly getting closer. It was the van. At first, I wasn't completely certain, but as it approached, I could clearly make out the same boxy white cargo van. No company logo, no side windows, no identifying marks, just a dirty, anonymous white van. It caught up to me impossibly fast and got right on my tail, staying inches behind my rear bumper. I was already going about 75 mph, but the van stayed glued to me, matching my speed perfectly. Then it suddenly switched lanes, accelerated beside me and matched my speed exactly. The driver rolled down his window about halfway. I could barely see his face through the darkness, just a vague shadow and what might have been a baseball cap. He motioned aggressively for me to roll down my window, but I refused. I kept my eyes forward, pretending not to notice. He kept gesturing frantically, then pointed at my truck bed like he was trying to tell me something was seriously wrong back there. At first, I hesitated. Maybe one of my cargo straps had come loose. Maybe something had fallen out onto the highway. But then I noticed something that didn't make any sense at all. There was nothing in the bed of my truck. It was completely empty. There was no cargo back there at all. That's when I realized with absolute certainty, he wasn't trying to warn me about anything. I kept driving, pretending not to notice him, but he started honking aggressively and drifting dangerously closer to my lane, nearly sideswiping me. I swerved slightly to maintain distance, and he suddenly sped ahead, cutting directly in front of me. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to slam on his brakes and cause a collision. But then, without any warning, he veered sharply onto the shoulder and came to a complete stop. I flew past him, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stayed in the fast lane, pushing my speed up to nearly 90 mph, just trying to create distance, trying to get away. A few seconds later, I checked my rearview mirror again. The van was back on the road, back on my tail. It followed me for another 20 miles, playing this terrifying game. Sometimes it would fade back until I couldn't see it anymore, letting me think I'd finally lost it. Then, out of nowhere, it would speed up and reappear right behind me, closer than before. I decided I needed to stop somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses. The next sign indicated there was a truck stop 5 miles ahead. I took that exit immediately, pulled into the lot, and parked directly under the brightest light I could find, right near the diesel pumps. There were a few semi-trucks lined up, and I could see several drivers inside through the windows of the attached diner. The van didn't pull in right away. I waited maybe 2 minutes, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Then it came slowly up the entrance ramp and into the parking lot, moving like a predator stalking prey. I got out of my truck and headed straight into the diner, practically running. The moment I walked in, the bell above the door rang, and the woman behind the counter looked up. She was maybe in her 50s, tired looking. I told her that a van had been following me for the last half hour, and she must have seen the terror in my face because she immediately called over to a trucker sitting at the counter. This guy stood up, absolutely massive. Flannel shirt, gray beard, the kind of guy you want on your side in a dangerous situation. He walked outside with me, and the second we stepped through the door, we both saw the van idling at the far end of the lot, just sitting there facing my truck like it was watching, waiting. The trucker muttered something like, "Yeah, that ain't right," and told me to go back inside immediately. He walked straight toward the van with this confidence I couldn't even imagine having. I didn't hear what he said, but a few seconds later, the van suddenly reversed violently, swung around in a tight arc, and peeled out of the lot at high speed, heading back toward the highway. The trucker came back, slowly shaking his head. He said there were 2 men inside, both wearing hoodies pulled low over their faces, both just staring straight ahead without speaking or acknowledging him at all. I stayed in that diner for almost an entire hour, drinking coffee I didn't want, waiting until I was absolutely certain they were gone. When I finally finished the rest of my drive, I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror the entire time. When I arrived in Davenport, I parked under the brightest hotel lights I could find and carefully inspected my truck. Everything appeared fine, but there were 2 distinct smudges on the tailgate, like someone had tried to open it with dirty, greasy hands. I quit that job a few months later. Now, every time I drive long distances, I fill up my tank before sunset. I bring plenty of snacks and drinks, and I absolutely do not stop unless it's somewhere crowded and open 24 hours. Because I know for a fact, if I had rolled down that window when they told me to, or if I had pulled over when they gestured for me to stop, I wouldn't be here right now telling you this story.